The restaurant was more a stage than a dining room. The chandeliers didn't simply light the space, they commanded it, scattering light like applause across velvet walls and polished mahogany. Every corner of the gilded sanctuary was engineered to impress, to whisper to the wealthy that they had indeed escaped the ordinary world. It was a place where power dined without needing to raise its voice. And yet, power was not the only language spoken here. There was another, quieter, older, the language of service, the subtle choreography of those who moved unseen. The servers, the bussers, the sommeliers, whose precision and silence created the illusion of effortless perfection. Among them was Annalise Carter, young, calm, efficient, her name tag gleaming like an afterthought beneath the soft white of her uniform. She was the kind of woman whose grace made her invisible. Not because she was forgettable, but because she blended into the rhythm of the restaurant too seamlessly. She knew when to step forward and when to vanish. To most, she was simply the waitress. But beneath that tidy bun, behind those steady brown eyes, there lived a mind sharper than the crystal wine flutes she polished each night. The art of invisibility. Annalise moved between tables with that quiet, deliberate rhythm of someone who had learned to make herself small in large spaces. She had been working at the Gilded Sanctuary for almost 2 years, long enough to understand that in places like this, invisibility wasn't just a byproduct of the job. It was survival. She could read a table like others read a novel. The nervous tapping of a spoon meant someone wanted attention but wouldn't dare raise a hand. The soft hum from a woman's throat meant the dish had been underseasoned but not worth complaint. The polite nod from a man wearing a Rolex worth her yearly rent meant, "You're dismissed." But she read other things too. Things no one noticed. When she passed by the corner booth, she noticed a man pretending to laugh at his boss's joke, shoulders tense. At another table, a couple stared at each other with practiced smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. The Gilded Sanctuary was filled with performances. And Annalise, unseen, witnessed them all. She wasn't bitter. She had learned early that the world often misjudged value, mistaking wealth for worth and silence for simplicity. But she also knew that silence was its own kind of power. The mind beneath the apron, in the locker room below the dining hall, Annalise kept a worn leather notebook, half filled with equations and half with poetry. On its cover, faintly written in pen, macro, mikromensch, economy, individual, humanity. It was a quote her father used to say, Dr. Erich Schmidt, a German biochemist who taught her that knowledge was the one currency that could never devalue. Her mother, Naomi Carter, had been a nurse, gentle, practical, unyielding in kindness. Her parents had been an unusual pair, a black American woman and a white German scientist. But love, she'd learned, was fluent in every language. Her childhood had been spent between New York and Heidelberg, her accent a soft hybrid of both worlds. She'd gone to the University of Heidelberg on a full scholarship, studying behavioral economics driven by the question, why do people with everything still crave more? But life had its own economics, and sometimes grief bankrupted even the brightest dreams. Her father's sudden death during a research trip, the medical bills her mother couldn't shoulder, and the visa complications that followed, they'd all forced her back to New York. A PhD student turned waitress overnight. Still, she didn't regret working here. Because at the Gilded Sanctuary, she was surrounded by the very kind of people she'd once studied. She listened, observed, learned. Every whispered deal, every careless insult, all of it became data. What others saw as humiliation, she quietly cataloged as insight. 11 p.m. The door opens that night. The sanctuary was busier than usual. The mayor's advisor dined in the east corner. A foreign ambassador entertained his entourage by the window. The air hummed with money and ego. Annalise, carrying a bottle of 2005 Waitress, passed the grand mirror near the bar, catching her own reflection for half a second, calm, focused, composed. She adjusted her collar and exhaled once before stepping toward Table 12, the VIP corner. That was when the air changed. The revolving door opened, and a group entered with the subtle thunder of people used to being noticed. The maitre d' straightened instantly, his rehearsed smile tightening at the edges. At the front of the group was a man with the posture of entitlement, tall, dark suit, salt gray hair, expression like marble. Grant Blackwell, the billionaire investor. owner of Blackwell Global Holdings, a man whose reputation was built on ruthless precision and whose scandals were cleaned faster than his wine glasses. He was the kind of man who never had to look at a menu because the world always served him what he wanted. Grant Blackwell. Grant had built empires from ashes and burned a few lives in the process. His company specialized in asset acquisitions, a sanitized term for taking over smaller firms and cutting half their staff to streamline performance. He believed in efficiency, not empathy. And tonight he was in a mood. A merger had gone sour. His publicist had warned him about his arrogant tone in an interview, and his favorite bottle of Riesling had been sold out. He needed a target, and in this restaurant the easiest targets wore aprons. He walked toward the reserved table with his associates, 2 men and 1 woman, all trying to keep pace with his stride. As he sat down, his cufflinks caught the chandelier's light, platinum engraved with his initials. GB Annalise approached, her notepad ready, her voice steady. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Gilded Sanctuary. May I start you off with—" Grant didn't look up. He was mid-sentence in English, then switched smoothly, deliberately to German. "Schau dir das an. Look at this. Nicht einmal hier kann man in Ruhe essen, ohne dass sie Leute vom Straßenrand einstellen. Even here, they hire people off the street." One of his colleagues chuckled uncomfortably. The woman tried to mask her unease with a polite smile. But Grant continued, his tone low enough to sound private, loud enough to ensure the waitress would hear. "Vielleicht versteht sie ja kein Wort. She probably doesn't understand a word." He finally looked up and froze for a fraction of a second. Because what he saw wasn't the usual nervous deferential look he expected. It was calm, controlled, and in her eyes, understanding. The waitress who understood, Annalise, didn't flinch. She had heard worse, but something in her chest twisted, not from shame but from the quiet recognition of pattern. She had been invisible so long, people forgot invisibility didn't mean ignorance. She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Still or sparkling water, sir?" she asked politely, her tone impeccable. Grant's mouth curved with faint disdain. "Sparkling. And don't overfill the glass." He turned back to his associates, switching languages again, still in German. "Wie typisch," he muttered. "Immer freundlich. Wie eine trainierte Maschine. Typical. Always polite. Like a trained machine." The woman beside him shifted uncomfortably. "Grant, maybe let's keep it." He raised a hand, silencing her. Annalise poured the water quietly, steady as a surgeon. But her mind was already working, calculating, observing, storing every syllable. Her German wasn't just fluent. It was flawless. The kind spoken in university halls, not apps. She had written entire research papers in that language, and something inside her decided, not tonight. A spark beneath silence. The night moved on with the mechanical rhythm of service. Table 7 sent back an undercooked steak. A sommelier spilled a drop of Merlot on a white napkin. But table 12, the billionaire's table, grew louder. Wine loosened tongues, and ego inflated conversations like helium. Grant bragged about his new venture in Berlin, a philanthropic tech fund that, in truth, was more about image management than impact. He spoke about Germany as if it were a pet project, about culture as if it were currency. And all the while he kept glancing at Annalise, almost amused by his own cruelty. He mistook her silence for powerlessness. She cleared plates, refilled glasses, nodded politely. But beneath that calm surface, a quiet storm brewed. When Grant began discussing the problem with hiring underqualified foreigners, he didn't even realize he was describing the person serving his meal. "Some people," he said in German, slicing into his steak, "are just better suited for serving. Not everyone can rise to the top." His associate coughed, whispering, "Grant, please, not here." He waved him off, finishing his glass of Riesling. "Relax, she doesn't understand. And if she does, well, maybe she'll learn something about her place." That was when Annalise turned, meeting his gaze for the first time, and replied, in perfect unaccented German, "Das habe ich längst gelernt. Herr Blackwell, aber vielleicht sind Sie es, der noch nicht verstanden hat, was oben wirklich bedeutet. I've already learned that lesson, Mr. Blackwell. But perhaps you're the one who hasn't yet understood what the top really means." The table went silent. Utterly, completely silent, Grant's knife froze midair. His eyes widened just slightly, the kind of shock a man feels when the mirror speaks back. The room that forgot to breathe. The air in the gilded sanctuary changed temperature. The chandelier light seemed sharper. Conversations at nearby tables slowed as guests sensed something happening, the kind of tension money couldn't ignore. Grant stared at her, his mouth opening, closing. You speak German? Annalise smiled softly. Morning sunlight broke through the glass facade of Blackwell Global Tower, spilling across a landscape of steel desks, murmuring assistants, and the faint hum of a billion-dollar machine awakening. Inside his 58th floor office, Grant Blackwell sat motionless, coffee untouched, replaying the moment that refused to leave his mind. The waitress's calm eyes, her perfect German, the quiet authority in her voice. The world had never spoken back to him like that. He was used to deals collapsing, politicians snarling, competitors bluffing. Those were predictable battles. But a young woman with a name tag had dismantled his certainty with a single sentence. "The morning after, sir?" His assistant, Elena, stood in the doorway with a stack of folders. "The Zurich calls at 10 and legal wants to confirm the merger briefing." Grant blinked, dragged his attention back to the room. "Right. Zurich. Push it 15 minutes. "Understood." She hesitated. "Are you all right?" "You look—" "Fine," he interrupted. She nodded, but the lie hung there. When she left, the silence in his office returned like a weight. He reached for his phone and, before he could stop himself, typed, "The Gilded Sanctuary Waitress, Annalise Carter, employee file." He deleted it immediately. What was he even doing? He wasn't that man, the one who hunted people to soothe his ego. But he couldn't shake the voice that had cut through his arrogance. "Maybe you're the one who hasn't yet understood what the top really means." The words had lodged somewhere deep, where truth and shame coexisted. The gossip storm by noon. Whispers had started circulating through the city's business circuit. Someone had filmed a fragment of the exchange, just the moment when Annalise had answered him back in flawless German. The clip was 10 seconds long, blurry, but the audio was clear. Billionaire Babel began trending by afternoon. On social media, people argued, some mocking him, others applauding her. That man got schooled in his own language. Respect to that waitress, pure composure. How about time someone reminded the rich they're not gods? Grant's PR team flooded his inbox. His communications director, Darius Ung, burst into the office. "Grant, we have a situation. I've seen it. It's viral. 17 million views on X and climbing. Some think it's fake. Others are dissecting your German." Grant exhaled slowly. "Damage control, then." Darius hesitated. "With respect, sir, maybe this isn't damage. People actually like that she stood up to you. If we spin this wrong, you'll look defensive. So I'm supposed to, what? Thank her publicly for humiliating me? Or you could show growth." Grant looked out at the skyline. Growth, a sterile corporate word. But the unease in his chest told him Darius was right. A waitress with wings at the Gilded Sanctuary. Annalise arrived for her evening shift unaware of how large the story had become. She noticed it first in the way her co-workers stared. Miguel grinned. "Girl, you broke the internet." "What?" He held up his phone. A thumbnail froze on her face mid-sentence, subtitles reading, "The waitress who taught a billionaire respect." Annalise's heart skipped. "Oh no." "Oh yes," Miguel said. "The manager's been fielding calls from talk shows. They want to interview you." "Absolutely not," she said quickly. "I'm not turning this into entertainment." Her manager, Renee, appeared beside them. "Sweetheart, I'm proud of you, but be careful. The press can twist stories. You handled him with grace, and keep it that way." Annalise nodded. "All I did was answer in another language." Renee smiled. Sometimes truth sounds loudest in a quiet voice. The encounter again. 2 nights later, Grant returned. No entourage this time. No arrogance either. He wore a plain gray suit, the kind you buy when you want to disappear. The maître d' stiffened. Last time's fiasco was still a scar. But Grant simply said, "Table 6, please." Annalise saw him before he saw her. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, followed by calm professionalism. She approached, pad in hand. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell." Sparkling or still? He looked up, humbled, nervous even. "Still." Please." A beat of silence passed. "I owe you an apology," he said. She sighed quietly. "You already gave one." "Not properly," he hesitated. "You didn't deserve what I said. And I saw the video. I imagine this has been uncomfortable." Her lips curved slightly. "Uncomfortable? Maybe. But truth often is." He nodded, taking the jab without protest. "I didn't post it," she added. "I know," he said softly. "I asked the restaurant to confirm that. Whoever did, maybe they meant well. Still, it exposed more about me than about you." For a moment, his voice wasn't that of a billionaire. It was that of a man facing his reflection for the first time. A shift in power. "Why did it bother you so much?" she asked suddenly. He blinked. "What?" "When someone like me speaks your language. Why does that offend you?" He looked down at his hands. "Because it reminds me that I've spent my life measuring people by the wrong scale." Annalise studied him. There was sincerity, raw and unpolished. "You could change that." He met her eyes. "I'd like to." A pause. She poured his water, then said quietly, "Change doesn't start with an apology, Mr. Blackwell. It starts when you stop believing you're the center of every story." He smiled faintly. "You sound like a professor." "I almost was," she replied, "before life had other plans." "Tell me," he said. She hesitated. "Off the clock." The invitation 2 days later, a letter arrived at the restaurant, embossed with the Blackwell Foundation seal. Inside was a short note. "For Ms. Carter, a scholarship dinner this Saturday. Invitation extended in gratitude, not guilt. G. Blackwell." Renee raised an eyebrow when she handed it to Annalise. "You planning to go?" "I'm not sure," Annalise said. "Feels like walking into the lion's den." "Or walking into the truth," Renee said. "Maybe he's changing." Annalise slipped the letter into her bag, uncertain whether it was curiosity or conscience urging her to attend. The scholarship dinner Saturday evening arrived. The ballroom at the Blackwell Cultural Center gleamed with minimalist elegance. Black marble floors, cascading light fixtures, violins soft in the background. Grant spotted her near the entrance, wearing a modest navy dress. She looked entirely at ease, as though the world could no longer intimidate her. "Ms. Carter," he greeted, extending a hand. "Mr. Blackwell." He guided her to a table near the front, where students from underserved communities were being honored. A host announced the creation of the Blackwell Language and Equity Grant, a new scholarship supporting bilingual and minority students in economics and linguistics. Annalise's breath caught. When he took the stage, his speech was different, stripped of ego. "A few weeks ago," Grant said, "I was reminded that intelligence doesn't ask for permission to exist. It just does. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it carries a tray. Sometimes it looks you in the eye and answers you in the language you use to hide your prejudice." Murmurs rippled through the audience. He continued steady. "This fund exists because education is not a privilege. It's a bridge. And because one woman had the grace to remind me what respect sounds like." He looked directly at her. Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. For once, Grant didn't flinch. The quiet aftermath after the dinner, as guests mingled, Annalise approached him. "That was unexpected," he smiled. "You inspired it." "I didn't ask for that, I know. That's why it means something." She tilted her head. "So this is your redemption arc?" "Maybe it's just my first honest one." Her eyes softened. "If you're sincere, prove it in silence. Let actions speak," he nodded. "Then you'll see them." A door opens. When she left that night, snow began to fall, the first of the season. Outside, the city lights shimmered against flakes that turned the sidewalk silver. Annalise looked up at the tower that bore his name. Somewhere inside, perhaps, a man was learning that worth wasn't measured in zeros but in humanity. And somewhere inside her, the bitterness she'd carried for years began to thaw. But unseen by both of them, a woman in a tailored coat snapped a photo of them leaving the event separately, her press badge glinting. The Herald would run a headline in 2 days. "Billionaire and Waitress, redemption or publicity stunt." The story was far from over. The Waitress and the Billionaire, redemption or reputation play. It showed Grant Blackwell standing beside Annalise Carter at the scholarship gala, the image cropped just tightly enough to suggest intimacy. Her expression calm, his faintly deferential, an unusual pose for a man whose name alone commanded markets. By 9 a.m., every newsfeed, podcast, and gossip blog had an opinion. The court of public opinion. He's only doing this to fix his image. She's the real hero, don't let them rewrite the story. Of course he's interested in her. Now, typical, every headline dissected. The same 10-second clip, now coupled with the gala photo, crafting a narrative neither of them had written. Annalise's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages, requests, invitations, strangers proclaiming admiration or suspicion. Her manager, Renee, intercepted the local press outside the gilded sanctuary. She's not available for interviews, she said, voice firm. She's working. Let her live. Inside, Annalise stood by the counter, holding her phone like it might combust. Miguel peeked over her shoulder. You're trending again, she sighed.
Why do people always turn dignity into spectacle?
At the top floor, meanwhile, in his office overlooking Manhattan, Grant scrolled through the same storm. Darius, his PR director, slammed a newspaper on the desk. They're twisting it, Grant. The whole narrative spun backward. I expected that, Grant murmured. But you don't understand. Some board members think you orchestrated the scholarship to cover last quarter's audit leak. Grant's head shot up. That's absurd. Absurd doesn't matter when it sounds believable. We need to respond, issue a statement, clarify the intent. Grant leaned back, eyes narrowing. If we do that, we make it about me again. I promised her I wouldn't. Darius exhaled, rubbing his temples. Then what's the plan? Let your stock drop while Twitter decides your ethics? Grant didn't answer. His gaze had drifted to the photo. That moment at the gala, her composed presence beside him. He'd built empires through control, but for the first time, he realized control meant nothing when you didn't own the story. The unexpected call that afternoon, Annalise's phone rang from an unknown number. Miss Carter? The voice was clipped, male, professional. This is Charles Grant, legal counsel for Blackwell Global Holdings. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Blackwell. Her pulse quickened. Is he suing me now? There was the faintest sigh on the other end. No, ma'am. He's asking for your help. My help. Yes, he'd like to meet her privately. No cameras, no press. He says it's important. Annalise hesitated. Every instinct told her to stay far away from his world. And yet, she'd spent enough time studying behavior to know when someone wasn't just reacting, but reckoning. Fine, she said. Tomorrow. Public place, understood. He suggested the City Library North Wing, 11 a.m. The library, she said, surprised.
He picked that?
Yes, Charles replied. He said it was neutral ground. The meeting at the library, the next morning under the vaulted ceilings of the New York Public Library, Grant sat alone at a marble table, jacket folded neatly beside him. When Annalise arrived wearing a dark coat and guarded calm, he stood. Miss Carter, he greeted. Mr. Blackwell. She sat opposite him. Between them lay silence and sunlight, broken only by the echo of distant footsteps. He began quietly. The press turned this into something neither of us wanted. She crossed her arms. That's how power works, Mr. Blackwell. It consumes everything near it. I deserve that, he said. But you don't. And they're twisting you into my accessory, and I can't allow that. Her tone sharpened. You don't get to allow or disallow my story. He nodded, chastened. You're right, which is why I need your permission to set the record straight. I want to release the full footage, she frowned. Full footage? Yes, my table's security camera. It caught everything, including my remarks, my arrogance, your response. I had it deleted from our archives, but the restaurant system kept a copy. If it goes public, it'll show exactly who was at fault. Why tell me? She asked softly. Because it involves you. I won't use your image without consent. She studied him for a long moment. Why now, guilt? He shook his head. Clarity! The leak before either of them could decide, fate did it for them. That evening, an anonymous source sent the full video to every major outlet. Within hours, it exploded again, only this time the story reversed. The footage showed everything. His initial insult, her poised response, the silence that followed. The public mood shifted from outrage to awe. She stayed composed. He actually looked ashamed. Maybe there's hope for accountability after all. Grant's inbox flooded with apologies from board members. Investors praised his transparency, ironically for a leak he hadn't orchestrated. But for Annalise, the fame was heavier than before. Journalists camped outside her building. Offers arrived from talk shows, universities, podcasts. The worst came from a blog that dug into her past, posting her father's death certificate, her unfinished PhD thesis, even photos from her mother's funeral. The exposure made her stomach turn. Fame, she realized, was just another form of exploitation, this time wrapped in praise. The breaking point by Friday, she was exhausted. At work, she barely smiled. The sanctuary that once gave her control now felt like a stage she couldn't step off. Grant showed up again, quietly, respectfully in the back booth. He didn't wear a suit, he looked human. "I saw what they did," he said when she approached. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said flatly. "They just found a new way to own my story." He leaned forward. "Then let's take it back," she frowned. "How?" "I want you to work with me, officially, on something that helps people like you, like me, before I learned better. A foundation, education, equality, language programs. You'd lead it," she blinked. "You want me to work for you?" "With me?" he corrected. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You think throwing philanthropy at guilt fixes it?" "No," he said quietly. "I think you can fix me." The line was dramatic, but his voice wasn't. It was raw, stripped of the armor he'd worn all his life. She sighed, conflicted. "You don't need saving, Grant. You need to learn to stay uncomfortable." He smiled faintly. "Then teach me." The threat behind the curtain that night as she left the restaurant, a sleek black car idled by the curb. A tinted window rolled down. "Ms. Carter?" a voice called. "A word?" She froze. A man stepped out, polished, expression unreadable. "I work for someone who prefers not to be named," he said. "You're becoming quite influential, Miss Carter. Be careful. Influence draws enemies. Who sent you?" she asked. He smiled thinly. "Let's just say not everyone benefits from a humbled billionaire." He handed her a business card with no name, just a number. "If things get difficult, call." The card disappeared into the night. Annalise stared at the card, uneasy. Power games, she realized, didn't end with apologies. They just changed arenas. The unlikely alliance. The next morning she called Grant. "You still serious about that foundation?" she asked. "More than ever." "Then I'm in," she said. "But on one condition. It's built for others, not for your redemption." "Deal," he said. "We'll call it the Staying Fund, a bridge for those the system overlooks." "And the slogan?" she asked. He smiled. "Simple. Respect speaks every language." The first step a week later in a modest press room, not a grand ballroom this time, they launched the foundation. No champagne, no chandelier, no pretense. Grant spoke briefly. Annalise followed, voice steady, eyes shining. "Language," she said, "isn't just words. It's dignity. Every accent carries history. Every silence holds strength. And if we listen, we'll realize fluency isn't about grammar. It's about grace." The applause was real, not thunderous, but earned. And for the first time in years, Grant felt lighter. Not because the world forgave him, but because he had finally learned how to forgive himself. But outside the room, a figure watched from the street, the same man in the black car, phone pressed to his ear. "She's inside," he murmured. "Yes, both of them." He listened, then nodded. "Understood." The call ended. He pocketed the phone, eyes narrowing. Time to remind the billionaire that redemption has a price. The winter wind howled through Midtown like a warning. Inside the glass-walled conference room of the Staying Fund, a different kind of storm brewed. Stacks of proposals covered the table. Community grants, school renovation projects, mentorship programs. Each page shimmered with hope. But at the head of the table, Grant Blackwell sat silent, jaw tight, as Annalise Carter read the morning's headline aloud. "Staying Fund linked to shell company fraud. Anonymous source claims Blackwell's redemption is a front." The room went still. "The shadow returns." "This is a setup," Darius Ung snapped, flipping through the article. "They're citing fake filings. Numbers don't even match our accounts." Grant didn't answer. He'd spent his life surviving corporate wars. He knew the smell of a hit piece. This one reeked of precision and money. "Who benefits?" Annalise asked quietly. Her voice was steady, but her hands clenched the paper. "Anyone threatened by what we're doing," Grant said. "The old guard, competitors, maybe someone inside my own company." He paused. "There's a man I used to work with, Victor Han, a venture strategist. He's brilliant, vindictive, and hates anything that doesn't make money. Annalise remembered the anonymous driver, the nameless card. Her stomach tightened. Then he's the one who's been watching us. The visit from Victor 2 days later. Grant walked into the lobby of his own corporate tower and found Victor waiting, lean and smiling like a knife. "Grant," he said, clapping slowly, "imagine my shock seeing you playing Saint on TV." "Imagine mine seeing you still breathing," Grant replied. His voice was ice. Victor laughed. "Relax, I didn't come for a fight. I came with a warning. The fund is bleeding money. Your community grants will sink you." "They're investments," Grant snapped. "In people," Victor leaned close. "People don't return dividends. Investors want profit, not parables. Close it down before the SEC comes calling." Grant stepped forward. "Tell whoever's pulling your strings that I'm done playing their games." Victor's smile curled. "Games? Grant, this is the game. And you forgot the first rule, the house always wins." He walked away, leaving the words hanging like a curse. The leak that night. A confidential email thread from the fund's server was leaked to the press. Doctored numbers, forged signatures, enough to spark an investigation. The donor network froze grants. Media cameras camped outside their office. Commentators called Annalise the face of a phony charity. She wanted to scream. Instead, she marched into Grant's office. "You said you had nothing to hide," she said. "I don't." "Then prove it. Open the books and all of them. Your companies, your personal accounts. Everything they'll try to twist." He hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But we do it together." Into the data for 3 nights, they worked in silence amid paper mountains. Annalise analyzed ledgers with the same discipline she'd once brought to economic models. Grant handled the legal maze. Somewhere between spreadsheets and coffee cups, a strange trust took root, the kind forged in shared battles. On the 4th night, she found it. A series of wire transfers tagged under Civic Synergy LLC, the same name from the fake filings. The signature belonged to a junior accountant, recently hired from one of Victor's firms. "Plant," Grant said. Anger and relief collided in his voice. "We can trace this." They sent the evidence to the authorities and to Renee, who leaked it to an independent journalist before the enemies could spin it. By morning, headlines shifted again. Evidence points to corporate sabotage of Blackwell Fund. The cost vindication came fast, but so did loss. 2 major donors still withdrew. The fund's balance dropped by millions. Grant sold a chunk of his private portfolio to cover grants that could have waited. "Why would you do that?" Annalise asked. "You don't owe them that money." "I owe them trust," he said. "For once, I want my name to mean something clean." She looked at him, surprised by the quiet conviction. Maybe people did change after all, not by apologies, but by what they were willing to lose. The threat escalates. 2 weeks later, a black envelope arrived at the fund's mailroom. No return address. Inside, a single photo. Grant and Annalise walking out of the library, followed by a typed note. "You were warned. Shut it down or she gets hurt." Annalise stared at it in shock. Grant's hands curled into fists. "This is Victor," she took a breath. "No, this is fear trying to win. We don't let it. He wanted to call security, the press, the police, but she stopped him." "Not yet. Let's finish the mission first. Then they'll have nothing to threaten." Faith in motion, they traveled to the Bronx to visit the fund's first community school renovation. Children ran through dusty hallways under construction tape, laughing as if nothing in the world could hurt them. A girl with braids ran up to Annalise. "Are you the lady who teaches languages?" "Sometimes," Annalise smiled. "What do you want to learn?" The girl grinned. "How to say I can do anything in German?" Annalise knelt beside her. "Ich kann alles schaffen." The child repeated it with a lilt of wonder. Even Grant smiled. For a moment, the noise of power and press and politics fell away. This was the why. Victor's downfall when the Department of Finance completed its audit. Victor's shell network collapsed like glass. Anonymous testimony from one of his own employees revealed he had funneled millions through bogus charities to sabotage competitors. Grant was cleared. The fund was praised for transparency, and Victor Hahn faced charges for fraud, blackmail, and extortion. When the news broke, Grant simply closed his laptop and looked out the window. He felt no victory, only a deep, tired peace. The offer of peace, a month later, Annalise found Grant on the foundation roof, watching the sunset over the city they'd both fought to reclaim. "Do you ever miss the old life?" she asked. He smiled. "Every day I don't live it," she laughed softly, spoken like a man who finally graduated. He turned to her. "Then maybe it's time you went back to school. On my scholarship this time." Her eyes widened. "Grant, no conditions," he said. "You wanted to finish your PhD, do it. The fund can survive without you for a year, but the world needs your voice louder." She looked at him long and steady. "Then promise me you'll keep listening while I'm gone. Always." And a letter from Heidelberg, months later. Grant received a letter stamped from Germany. Inside, a photo of Annalise standing before the University of Heidelberg, smiling beneath the stone arches. On the back she'd written, "For the first time in years, I feel seen without being watched." Grant read it twice, then slipped it into his wallet. Some investments, he realized, paid in silence and light. The return of threats, but peace rarely lasts long in a world built on egos. A new anonymous email hit the fund's server that winter. Lines of encrypted code and a single sentence. "You exposed one snake. The nest still lives." Grant forwarded it to Darius with 3 words. "We're not done." Because behind Victor had been others, powerful figures in finance and politics who saw the staying fund as a threat to their carefully built inequality. And this time, the fight would go beyond headlines, into policy, law, and conscience. The promise before battle, Grant flew to Heidelberg to visit Annalise before the storm rose again. They met by the river, the city glowing under lanterns and mist. "Trouble?" she asked. He nodded. "The fund's being targeted again. We're stronger now, but we'll need you back soon." She smiled. "You didn't come to recruit me. You came for strength." "Maybe both." They walked in silence until he said, "I used to think power was measured in numbers. Now I know it's measured in people like you." Annalise looked at him with a mix of admiration and resolve. "Then let's use it right this time. Not to defend ourselves, to build something no one can corrupt." Winter faded. The city thawed into pale sunlight, cautious and clean as if testing forgiveness. The staying fund, once a scandal, then a symbol, was breathing again. Children learned new words in small classrooms painted with hope. Single mothers attended night courses. Young men in halfway homes wrote their first resumes. And somewhere above them all, on the 40th floor of a modest building that bore no logo, 2 names shared the same brass plaque. Annalise Carter, co-founder Grant Blackwell, chairman emeritus. They'd stopped being headlines. They'd started being change. The call from Capitol Hill, it began with an email marked urgent. Education Committee hearing, language access bill proposal. Request for testimony. Ms. Annalise Carter, director, the Staying Fund. Annalise read it twice. She'd never imagined Congress would want to hear from a waitress-turned-economist. Grant found her pacing the hallway. "You'll go," he said. "I'm not a politician." "Exactly," he replied. "They've heard enough of those." He saw the worry in her face and smiled. "You once told me respect speaks every language. Maybe now the world needs a translator." A flight of fear and faith. On the plane to Washington, Annalise drafted her speech by hand. Her fingers trembled, but her heart was steady. The headline that had once humiliated her, the mocked waitress, now trended again. This time, as history retold itself, from waitress to witness, the woman who taught a billionaire humanity will testify before Congress. Grant stayed in New York, managing the fund and deflecting new financial attacks from unseen adversaries. He told the press simply, "If power doesn't listen, we'll speak louder." Hear the hearing. The committee room was carved from mahogany and old money. Senators shuffled papers. Cameras hummed like insects. When Annalise stepped to the microphone, murmurs rippled. She wore a plain black blazer, a silver pin of the fund's logo, a small open book whose pages became wings. Her opening words cut through the noise. "I was once invisible. Not because I lacked intelligence, but because people looked through me. Tonight I speak for every person who's been told their voice has an accent too heavy, a background too small, or a dream too large." She spoke of language barriers in healthcare, education, job applications, of how fluency decided futures. "Dignity shouldn't require translation," she said softly. "Understanding should be policy." For 5 full minutes after she finished, the room was silent. Then came applause, slow, cautious, then unstoppable. Outside, reporters swarmed her with questions, but one young intern whispered the only thing that mattered. My mother would have understood you. The backlash returns that night. Opposition think tanks spun her testimony as emotional activism. Anonymous donors funneled dark money into campaigns painting the fund as a propaganda front. Grant received threats. Again, cryptic emails, doctored invoices, whispers that old investors wanted him ousted from his remaining companies. But something had changed. Instead of calling lawyers, he called Renee. Turn every threat into transparency. Publish everything online, budgets, donors, mistakes. Let the truth out before they weaponize it. Within days, the fund's website became a living ledger, open to the world. The smear campaigns lost air. The attackers had no secrets left to twist. The return to Heidelberg a month later. Anneliese returned to Germany to defend her doctoral thesis, revived and refined. Behavioral Economics of Respect, a cross-cultural study on power and empathy. Grant flew in quietly to attend, sitting in the back row like any proud friend. Her closing statement moved the entire auditorium. Markets rise on confidence, but societies rise on compassion. And compassion, like language, is learned through listening. When the committee chair announced summa cum laude, Grant clapped first. Later, outside beneath the blooming chestnut trees, he handed her a small envelope. Inside, a contract drafted by his own lawyers. Offer of co-leadership, the Staying Fund Global Initiative. She looked up. You don't have to do this. I do, he said. Because it's no longer my foundation. It's ours. The new threat success invited enemies. One night, a data breach hit their servers. A final attack from the remnants of Victor Hahn's network. Millions in aid funds were frozen pending investigation. Panic spread among staff. But instead of hiding, Anneliese held a live stream. We've been accused again, she told thousands watching. But transparency saved us once. It will save us again. She showed receipts, audit logs, even her own salary. Then she spoke directly to the hackers. You can steal files, not faith. You can freeze money, not momentum. Within 48 hours, a cybersecurity nonprofit joined their cause pro bono, restoring everything. The breach backfired. Donations doubled. The night of recognition 6 months later, at the Global Human Dignity Summit in Geneva, the United Nations awarded the Staying Fund the Humanitarian Impact Medal. Anneliese took the stage beside Grant. Cameras flashed, but she ignored them, speaking instead to the millions watching online. I once believed silence was survival. Now I know silence is surrender. We win not by shouting, but by speaking truth consistently, courageously, and kindly. Grant followed with only one line. She taught me that fluency is not about perfect grammar. It's about perfect grace. The audience rose. The personal moment later that night. Away from the lights, they stood on a balcony overlooking Lake Geneva. You changed the world, Grant said quietly. She smiled. No, we listened to it. The wind tugged at her hair. He tucked a strand behind her ear. You could stay here, politics, global councils, all of it. She shook her head. I belong where voices are still small. He nodded. Then I'll go where you go. They didn't call it love. They didn't need to. It lived quietly between them, like music between verses. The final letter year later, Anneliese received a handwritten note from a girl in the Bronx, the same child who'd asked how to say I can do anything in German. I won my school essay contest. My topic was you. Ich kann alles schaffen. Tears blurred the ink. She pinned the letter above her desk, beside her father's old quote, Sprache ist Macht. Language is power. Legacy Grant retired quietly, donating most of his fortune to educational endowments. The tabloids called it repentance. Those who knew him called it balance. Anneliese continued to teach, to travel, to build. Her lectures filled halls across continents. In one speech, she summed up everything they'd lived. Respect is not a currency, it's a contagion. When you give it, it multiplies. Epilogue. The world listens back years later. A documentary played the old footage. The restaurant, the insult, the quiet reply in flawless German. But this time it ended not with scandal, but with a montage, classrooms, clinics, libraries, faces once invisible, now radiant. The narrator's voice closed on a single line. Sometimes the most fluent answer isn't spoken in words. It's spoken in change. And in a small frame on her office wall, next to the UN medal, hung a single photograph. A waitress and a billionaire, standing not as opposites but as equals, under a caption written by hand, "When respect speaks, the world listens back."